expand the screen here. Just give me 1 second there. Come on. There. I'm going to start by highlighting the movies for next month. I'm undecided whether I'm going to do The Zookeeper's Wife or The Devil Next Door. I will let you know as soon as I make a decision. And the other movie that I've highlighted, which is on Netflix, is called Sarah's Key. It is a good movie. You will get this in an email when you're done. When we're done. Okay, we've got to mute. Rabbi, can you mute all the mics?
Taken care of.
Okay. So there's a bit of a date change for the next meeting. It's going to be a week later on October the 26th at 4 p.m. I have duty to do at the JCC on the 19th. So I had to postpone it. So I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot comment on the law. However, I found Ben Ferencz a fascinating subject, and I hope you will as well. I'm going to highlight a bit of the trailer now, so you can see it.
I landed on the beaches of Normandy. I was a member of General Patton's army. We pursued the Germans back across France, back into Germany. And by that time, I was assigned as a war crimes investigator. I believe I was the first war crimes investigator in the United States Army. The problem I faced as the chief prosecutor at Nuremberg was, what do I ask for? Here were 3,000 men who every day went out and murdered in cold blood thousands of people, including children, shot one shot at a time. And I felt that I could not possibly do justice to the million people who had been killed. But if I can establish a rule of law which could protect humankind in the future, that would make this trial more meaningful than whatever I would do with these handful of murderers. All of them pleaded not guilty. Nobody came in and said I did anything. Oh my goodness, no. Said this was necessary to carry out Hitler's orders, and there was a war going on. What do you want us to do? I had 22 defendants selected by me out of 3,000 mass murders who murdered over 1 million people. I could prove it. I had all their top secret contemporaneous documents, no question about the facts. Their specific assignment was to murder in cold blood every single Jewish man, woman, and child they could lay their hands on. And I knew that picking 22 defendants out of 3,000 men is only a poor sampling, for the ridiculous reason that we only had 22 seats in the dock. Did we seek to do justice? Of course not, because we'd still be there trying Nazis to this day. So you try to make a statement of principle. The principle is, don't do this. It's a crime against humanity. Stop doing it. If you insist upon doing it, we'll try to catch you if you're a leader and put you away so you won't do it again, and others will be deterred from doing it. So when the presiding justice, Michael Mismano, opened the trial, he said,
"We are now ready to hear the presentation by the prosecution."
I then went on to say, vengeance is not our goal,
nor do we seek merely a just retribution. We ask this court to affirm by international penal action man's right to live in peace and dignity, regardless of his race or creed. The case we present
is a plea of humanity to law, because really, that's what I was trying to accomplish.
Ben Ferencz was born in the Carpathian Mountains of Transylvania in 1920. When he was 10 months old, his family moved to America. His early
Izzy, you're muted.
We can't hear.
Izzy, you're muted.
Izzy, it's actually through Zoom.
Izzy, you're muted. We can't hear you at all.
Okay, now you will. Sorry. Benjamin Ferencz was born in the Carpathian Mountains of Transylvania in 1920. He was 10 months old. His family moved to America. His earliest memories of the small basement apartment in a Manhattan district, appropriately referred to as Hell's Kitchen. Even at an early age, he felt a deep yearning for universal friendship and world peace. Leslie Stahl of 60 Minutes quoted, "It is not often you get a chance to meet a man who holds a place in history like Ben Ferencz. When we first reported on him back in 2017, he was 97 years old, barely 5 feet tall, and he served as a prosecutor of what's been called the biggest murder trial ever. The courtroom was Nuremberg, the crime, genocide, and the defendants, a group of German SS officers, accused of committing the largest number of Nazi killings outside the concentration camps. More than 1 million men, women, and children shot in their own towns and villages in cold blood. Ferencz is the last Nuremberg prosecutor alive today. But he isn't content being just part of 20th century history. He believes he has something important to offer the world right now. I am still there fighting. And you know what keeps me going? I know I'm right. This March, Ben Ferencz turned 101, and he's still fighting there. A bust of Ferencz was just installed outside the Nuremberg courtroom, where he argued almost 3/4 of a century ago. Below his face, his motto, law, not war. He has been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. I have to digress for a moment because a significant event on Rosh Hashanah 2013 took place right here in Phoenix. It is not often that one meets up with a living legend of the Holocaust. In 2013, when Pinky and I moved here to Phoenix, we were invited by our neighbor Risa and Bruce Mellon for Rosh Hashanah lunch. Ben Ferencz is a 5-foot powerhouse, and I was honored to meet another 5-foot powerhouse here in Phoenix. Some of you may know him, and some may have met him. When I was introduced to Abe Meth, the first thing he told me was, he's into his 2nd century. That is a wow on its own. We were seated at the table, and Abe began questioning me about my history, of my experiences growing up in South Africa. I was amazed at his quickness of mind and the questions he asked. Then I asked him about his life story. A centenarian who read the Torah on Shabbat, Shabbat services, wrote an opera and helped several generations of youngsters prepare for the B'nai Mitzvah. Abe Meth was a beloved figure throughout the Valley's Jewish community. Speaking with 101-year-old Abe Meth, you'd never think he was the victim of Nazi persecution, a man who once hunkered down in a factory basement, working to help save lives of fellow Jews as rockets exploded outside. Abe is clear and articulate as he recalls how he forged documents to help save others during the Holocaust. He was one of the last Jews in Budapest to escape deportation by the Nazis in World War II. Not only was Abe a survivor, rescued in Budapest by Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg, and was given safe haven at the famed Glass House. At his time in the Glass House, Abe, a skilled calligrapher, helped Wallenberg forge Schutzpasses, protective Swedish passports that ensured the carrier that he or she was under the protection of the Swedish government. The Schutzpass also exempted the holder from wearing a yellow Star of David, which all Jews were requested to wear. Abe was one of the rare survivors still living who actually worked with Wallenberg and his rescue mission. Wallenberg saved thousands of Jews through this maneuvering. I would like to welcome to our group Ben Ferencz, and I see Steve's brother is here as well. Welcome. To give us some discussion, some stories, some insight to Ben Ferencz. So that was it. So Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Izzy. Hi, everybody. I really want to thank Izzy and the Smile on Seniors for hosting this conversation this afternoon about Ben Ferencz and his extraordinary world. I thought I'd update you on a few things. My recent visit to him, and my conversation with him this afternoon. He sends his regards. He wishes he could be here. He's got a full plate. It's also a little after 7 o'clock there. He's starting to wind down his day, and he's not 100% in the evening like he is earlier in the day. But right around his, that still hasn't dimmed his mission. And I'll go back a couple of years. And when he turned 99, he was in Washington, D.C. for the honor of being that year's recipient of the Anne Frank Award. He's also very proud of the fact that year he renewed his driver's license. They can do that in Florida if you pass the eye exam, and sure enough, he did pass it. I suggested to him that he might invest in a self-driving car, but so far he hasn't done that. He also told me he's looking for an assistant. He says that he's been overwhelmed with work in the last 10 years, especially since he's been the last surviving prosecutor of the trials. He gets many requests for speaking engagements, interviews from around the world, from news media, from different publication. And, the fact that he's looking for an assistant, I said, Uncle Benny, seriously? What kind of job security comes with working for a 101-year-old, and he said, if he could find someone, they would learn more in 6 months. They were a law student. They could learn more in 6 months than any law school or textbook could teach them. And that's because he calls himself a living textbook. He did mention to me that there are a couple of biographies in the work, and that there are some, he's got some movie rights. He ended up getting movie rights back from the Weinstein Group after the Harvey Weinstein allegations, and they had control of it, but he got it back when Weinstein was indicted. So he's happy about that. There's other people looking to make a motion picture of the story of his life. And I asked him who he would like to see play him in a motion picture. And he told me the guy that isn't available is James Cagney. He said he'd love to have seen James Cagney in that role. And as an aside, he told me one of his favorite movies is My Cousin Vinny. So if you haven't seen My Cousin Vinny, take a look at it. So as you know, he's the only surviving chief prosecutor of the trials. And in fact, as far as we know, he's the only survivor, period, of anyone who participated in it, not just the prosecutors. I think that someday, after an enterprising grad student in a history or sociology should probably write a doctoral thesis about, what happened to the participants in the Nuremberg trials after those trials ended. That's been a goal of Benny's, to try to teach someone or to instruct someone on how to do that. He said that there were probably over 200 individuals who were part of that trial, researchers, witnesses who testified, obviously physically absent, but deeply involved in every sense for the millions of victims of crimes that he was prosecuting the Nazi perpetrators for. It was an emotional event that has seared him throughout his life. And to this day, when he discusses it, I still can see him get choked up about it. You know, he's frequently asked after the trial whether a total of 22, that he at 27 years old, if he was nervous about facing these mass killers in a courtroom, including 6 SS generals who would have years earlier shot him on sight. And basically his response was, no, I wasn't nervous. They were nervous. I didn't murder anybody. They did, and I had the evidence to prove it. So anecdotally, I could tell you that the Prosecuting Evil documentary came about because Barry Avrich, the producer of that documentary, was home. His wife was watching 60 Minutes, and she said, you got to come in here. You got to see this piece that Leslie Stahl has done about this last surviving prosecutor who's in his late 90s. And that sort of started the ball rolling. Within 6 months, he had the documentary not only shot and finished, but produced and pre-produced and ready for distribution. When I saw Barry at the New York premiere a few years ago, I asked him, I said, you know, what's the normal timeline for getting a documentary of that magnitude out to the public in 6 months? And he said, we don't normally do them in 6 months. It usually takes 12 to 18 months. But because of, at the time of Benny's advanced age, he wanted to make sure that he had it produced and finished in time for Benny to give it his blessing. So the result was a documentary that was really fast-tracked and has become a very popular talking point for many of Benny's causes to this day. So, you know, I have some other...
Yeah.
I have some things I could just share with you before we get into any conversations. When and I don't know if you can see this, but this is a picture that Benny gave me last time I visited him in Florida. And on the other side of this, someone had done a picture of him. That is his hand. I think this was shot when he was 99. It's a picture of his hand holding a picture of him when he was a soldier. I thought that was pretty extraordinary, and then flipped it around and took this picture today. He gave me a mezuzah as a gift. It was sitting on his table, and I said, wow, this is really some mezuzah. This mezuzah was basically dedicated and donated to him, and he doesn't remember by whom, and the inscription on the back doesn't really tell us much because all it says is special edition for Israel's 60th anniversary. So he gave it to me, and he said, I think I didn't want to take it, but he said, you know, I think you'll get more use out of it than I will. A couple of few books that he's written: Common Sense Guide to World Peace, which I think is still available on Amazon. This is one of his favorites. It's a short guide to planethood. In fact, his foundation was called Planethood. And then one of our cousins, Tom Huffman, who was married to a cousin, pulled together a lot of Benny's letters that he wrote to his then fiancée during the war, soon to be his wife, my Aunt Gertrude, who has since passed away. And this is a compilation of many of those letters that were written. A lot of good pictures in there and a lot of historic documentation that has been accumulated.
Steve, can you talk about some of the awards that Benny has gotten?
Yeah, so the one that he's most proud of, so it's funny, when we go to visit him, he's got a bookcase, and on it he keeps several medals and published documents and awards. And the one that he always goes back to, no matter who comes to visit, whether it's my kids or my kids bring their girlfriends or their boyfriends over. He always pulls out this one medal that was given to him, and he said he's especially proud of this one because one of the previous recipients was Nelson Mandela, from obviously from RSA. So that one is near and dear to his heart. In 2009, he received the Erasmus Prize. The Erasmus Prize is the equivalent to the Nobel Peace Prize in Europe. It comes with a pretty hefty cash prize, I think of about $500,000. He's pretty proud of that one as well because other individuals, including the famed artist Marc Chagall, Simon Wiesenthal, and Amnesty International, and Claude Levi-Strauss were all previous recipients of the Erasmus. And you can Google the Erasmus Prize and you can see kind of the history behind that. He also, a few years ago, he was in Washington, D.C., I think I mentioned earlier, for the Anne Frank Award. And then he was in Atlanta not too long ago, before COVID, to receive one of the Peace Awards given by the Martin Luther King Peace Center in Atlanta. That was presented to him by MLK's daughter. Every day he's taking phone calls. Every day he's committing to conversations and lectures, especially if it's from a law school or law students. He wants to leave an indelible mark on young people, the people who are our future. As much as he likes talking to seniors, his preference is to mold the minds of young people. I will tell you that in the 1980s, I was a journalist and I was working in Providence, Rhode Island, and I was covering, for the international community, I was covering the Klaus von Bülow trial. And one of Klaus von Bülow's trial lawyers was Alan Dershowitz. So we had Alan Dershowitz in the studio, and I knew that Alan knew my uncle because I had visited, many times I'd visited my uncle at his home in New Rochelle, New York, and I would see various pictures in his office, and he had a lot of pictures of him on panels, discussion groups with Dershowitz. So I had introduced myself to Dershowitz, who I've now seen and met a number of times since that meeting in the 1980s. And I introduced myself and I said, I think you know my uncle, Ben Ferencz. And he said, Ben Ferencz is your uncle? And he was like, wow. He said, I'm really pleased to meet you. He said, do you know that your uncle probably has one of the greatest legal minds of any attorney in the 20th century, and maybe even in any century? And I saw that as pretty high compliment and high praise coming from Dershowitz, who we all know and have probably heard speak many times.
Right. There was a question posed to you, and you called Ben this morning to ask him his opinion. Where's Paul? Okay, have you got the question in front of you?
Oh, the question was about the insurrection at the United States Capitol on January 6th.
Yes.
So I asked him about it, and basically he summed it up in kind of a few words. All he said was, there's a bunch of hoodlums and Donald Trump is a murderer. And that was sort of his extent of it. And I said, okay. And he said, well, he said, I'm not really following the trial, but I will tell you that I did write a letter to the editor in the New York Times after Trump killed Soleimani, the terrorist in Iran. And Benny has always stuck to his guns. Even though he was a great supporter, obviously, of Israel and has done many things for reparations, for Holocaust victims, and ran those organizations after the war, he has always stuck to his guns that anyone who has committed war crimes or crimes against humanity should be tried in a court of law, which is why he's fought for the last 70 years for the establishment of the International Criminal Court as a institution to take those people to trial. So when world leaders, whether they be presidents, prime ministers, or anyone else, takes out an enemy of the state by launching missiles or assassinations or whatever it might be, many will call them murderers. And he got a call, by the way, after he published that New York Times editorial. He got a call from the dean of the Harvard Law School, who I think he's known every dean probably since the 1940s. And this dean called him and said, "Good for you, Benny. Stay with it. Stick to your guns. Good for you. Good for you. Call them out. Call them out for what they are." And he always takes great pride in that, sticking to his guns.
Okay, if any of you have any questions for Steve, just unmute your microphone. Sorry.
Where does your uncle live now?
So he was, for many years, he was a snowbird. He had lived in New Rochelle, New York, since moving back from Germany in the 1950s, had the same home, which he sold last year. He was a snowbird living in Kings Point in Delray Beach, Florida, where he purchased several units for his family for the last, I'd say he's been there maybe 40 years. My mom and dad had a place, literally, their front door was maybe 100 yards from him. At one time, after his sister Pearl, my Aunt Pearl, retired, and my Uncle Ed, the other brother, retired, they all retired to Kings Point, and all of the children of Joseph Ferencz lived literally within walking distance of each other for the first time since they were kids. He's the only one still alive of all the siblings, and the only sister-in-law still alive is my mom, who's going to be 90 next week. And when I spoke to Ben today, I reminded him that my mom's birthday is next week. So Mom, if you're listening, you can expect a call from Benny to wish you a happy birthday.
No, you were mentioning that he needed help with his, writings and things. And my suggestion would be to call the JCC where he lives, because there may be people there who could, be an intern or something like that. That's
well, right now he's in self-imposed exile because of COVID. So he's not letting too many people into his. Well,
they could do it on Zoom too. They could do it on Zoom too. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, well, he's 101 years old, and technical skills on Zoom are not his forte.
Oh, okay.
I appreciate the suggestion.
Okay.
Steve, we also discussed his daily regimen in Florida, and that he's kind of a fitness fanatic. Loves to swim, and what where he moved to, we discussed he had to have I think 2 swimming pools, an indoor and an outdoor.
Yeah, he's been an avid swimmer his entire life, and when they were investigating where he knew that his wife wanted to get to Florida because she really couldn't handle the cold anymore of New York. So he put one of his assistants at the time, 40 or 50 years ago now, I guess, to research retirement communities that have an indoor pool, because he knew that Florida gets a lot of storms, and he wanted to have access to swimming every day of the year, regardless of the weather. So they settled at Kings Point, because Kings Point has indoor pools, outdoor pools, and I think he hasn't swum recently because of COVID. He also had developed some issues with his legs that needed medical attention, and I think the doctor suggested that he not swim anymore. So, but he still says he does 100 push-ups a day. When I was there, I mean, how many people 101 years old can get on the ground, do push-ups, and then get themselves up unassisted without calling 911? I don't think there are too many people out there who could do it, but he's still doing it and did it. I was just there in June after we closed on the sale of my mom and dad's unit. I stopped by to see him, and we had lunch together. and he's still showing off. Still showing off.
Do you have any other questions? No. Pinky's asked a question, Steve. We're not familiar with Florida. Is that a retirement community?
That's a retirement community that is in Delray Beach, which is just north of Boca Raton and south of West Palm Beach. So very close to Interstate 95, I-95, which is the big interstate that goes all the way to Maine and down to Florida. And it's a self-contained community with a clubhouse and fitness center and swimming pools. And when I first started visiting down there, probably about 25, 30 years ago, when my mom and dad retired there, there wasn't much else around Delray Beach. That place was one of the original retirement communities. It is now, since then, it's exploded because all the baby boomers who are retiring want to be down there. So it's one of the older places. Now there's many, many new places that have been built in the 40 years since they retired down there.
Scott,
Yeah.
welcome.
Hi.
We'd love to hear from you.
Our mother is right here with me.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Mom. Hi, Scott.
Steve, I also just want to mention he's got a very strong connection with the Holocaust Museum. I remember going up there a number of years ago. Many of his official papers are there, and it's contributed a lot to the Holocaust Museum. And I was there for a workshop once. I just mentioned the guy. Somebody saw my name, and he knew immediately, are you related to Ben Ferencz? So he has a very strong connection there.
Yeah, Scott, it's the Benjamin Ferencz archives occupy. In fact, there was a woman who was at the premiere of the Prosecuting Evil in New York, because that was sponsored by the Holocaust Museum at the Stryker Center in Manhattan. Also, I remember, Scott, you had gone to an event in Manhattan where somebody honored him with an award. Was that at NYU, or where was that?
It was at Cardozo.
Oh, was that Cardozo Law School?
Okay, thank you. Can't hear you, Scott. Hello?
Scott, we're not hearing you.
A popular figure. Like a celebrity.
We didn't hear that. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, well, we went up to see, he got an award at Cardozo Law School. I don't remember the name of the award. It's an annual award, and I know Bill Clinton had gotten the award and some other people, and it was just interesting to see the reaction of the students who were involved in international law there. They all know who he is, and he's like a rock star. He's a little rock star, and it was very interesting to see that. And the first thing he said to me was, "What are you doing to save the world?" I mean, it's still his focus. I hadn't seen him in a number of years, and that was still his thing. So.
Well, that even his kids, all our cousins, Scott, will tell you this, that when they were younger and they would all sit around the dinner table, basically he would start the conversation by asking all the children, "What have you done for humanity today?"
Yeah. Quite.
Steve?
Yes.
And he was an illusionist.
He calls himself a prestidigitator extraordinaire. And he used to do sleight of hand tricks for us when we were kids. He would come in and he'd pull quarters out of our ears. He would try and sleight of hand show us these different tricks. He enjoyed entertaining the kids.
Remember that? He did like magic tricks.
Oh.
He did those magic tricks. The other thing that he did, this is going back to the war now, he saved a parachute that he and his wife were with Telford Taylor on a plane, and I don't remember the exact details of it. He could recall better than I, obviously. The plane was going down, and they were told to put on their parachutes and to vacate. And Telford Taylor, who was who ran the tribunals, the war crime tribunals, was on there with him. Everybody jumped out, including Benny, Telford Taylor, his wife, and Aunt Gertrude, and she ended up, I think, on the wrong side of the border and had twisted an ankle. But he kept that parachute, one of the parachutes, and he set it up. We had a family reunion once in the backyard of his home in New Rochelle, and he set up that parachute as a tent. Yeah. And to this day, I'm not sure where that parachute is. Maybe it's at the Holocaust Museum, for all we know. But he kept that for many years because it saved their lives.
Do you have any other questions?
Itzy, the only thing I'd like to say is after seeing the documentary when he received the award from Harvard University, I hope that Harvard University plays that recording to every law student because his message was loud and clear.
Thank you, Paula. Ellen, you had a question. You muted. Ellen, I wanted to ask. Okay, Ellen, who goes under the pseudonym of David Tuckman, asked, did Ben have any children?
3 girls and a boy.
3 girls and a boy, okay.
So his youngest is still, well, they're all in their 60s now. And my cousin Don lives in Wales. He's closest to Ben because he's also an attorney, and he sort of continues to carry the torch for him. He was involved with his Planethood organization. He does a lot of speaking around the globe on behalf of his father, and had been his travel companion to many of the events over the last decade or so, because he didn't want his dad to be traveling by himself. He has a daughter who's retired. She was an attorney in New York and quite the environmentalist. He has another daughter living in California in the San Diego area, my cousin Robin, and she worked for the state of New York. And then he has his oldest daughter was an interpreter for the courts in California, and I think she lives in Berkeley. So they've all been, throughout their lives, they've all been very active. I think unfortunately, though, he spent a lot of time away. When they were kids growing up in New Rochelle, he spent a lot of time in Israel and in Germany on business. And because he still sort of owns what he calls it is the cleanup after the war, which took literally more than a decade. So his kids, I think all his kids were actually born in Germany. And then they all obviously emigrated. Well, he was an American citizen already, so they came here when he moved the family back to the United States.
Thank you, Ellen. Do we have any more questions for Steve? Any more questions about this 5-foot dynamite? I remember my mother was 5 foot tall and always used to say dynamite comes in small packages.
What did he think of the movie Judgment at Nuremberg?
I really don't know that I've ever asked him that question.
No, I'm just curious. I'm just curious because when they make a movie, they sort of have free reign over facts, and it's not always correct. So
yeah, there's editorial license, I think they call it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. You know, I've never really talked to him about those. When we visit, he's because we're usually visiting and bringing friends and other people to his place. Not recently, obviously, but you know, they want to hear his story. They want to hear his story about his life and the trial. And fortunately for us, 60 Minutes took interest in him, and so did Barry Average. who did the documentary. And there's also a documentary that was released in Germany. And there were a lot of articles and books written in German about him that he shared with us. So obviously I don't speak German, so I haven't been able to, I didn't research those and look at those, but there are a lot of books available. If you've been to The Hague, the last time I was at his visiting with him, there was a bronze statue, a bust of him, just his face and his head. And I said, "Where'd you get that?" And he said, "Some sculptor did it, made it, gifted it to me. He took a picture of him and used that as the model for the bust that was that he had carved out." And he said, "I'm giving it." He says, "I can't decide whether to give it to whether the United Nations is going to take it or The Hague." So it ends up it's at The Hague. The other thing that's there is a bench. This is not your average park bench. If you can Google Benny's bench, I think, or Benjamin Ferencz's bench, and you'll see a picture of a bench that was dedicated at The Hague in his name. I don't know how many of you know Sue Adada. She's active in Apex. She's from here. She was over there a couple of months ago visiting, and I noticed on Facebook that she put up a bunch of pictures that she was in The Hague. And I said, "You got to check out my uncle's bench." And she goes, "A bench? What do you mean a bench?" I said, "Go check it out." And then she took a picture of it, put it back on Facebook, and she said, "I was amazed at how big and how extraordinary this bench was." So there's also a street named after him there as well, which he attended the event when they named the street in his honor. So he was there for that. If you watch the documentary, he was also instrumental in. It was one of the. He gave opening remarks in one of the trials. I think he was 92 or 93 years old when he was invited to give opening remarks to one of the trials at the International Criminal Court. He has blasted almost every Republican administration that has tried to block the United States involvement in the International Criminal Court, especially not very fond of John Bolton. So he'll tell you, he would tell Bolton to his face how unfond of him he is if he were ever to show up in Delray Beach, but I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Steve, coming back to the bench, I Googled the bench, and it's a big bench. It's not a 6-foot park bench. I would imagine, I couldn't find any dimensions of the bench, but I would imagine it's either 22 feet or 22 meters, making the significance of the 22 defendants in the court.
That's a good point. I'm going to research that, Izzy. I'll get back to you on that. I'm going to see if that in fact is what happened. I mean, you know the story about why there were that many defendants, right?
Yes.
So he picked the cream of the crop, the most educated, the highest ranking. I mean, some of these defendants had double PhDs. These were not stupid people in the sense of academia. So he selected those for a reason. The fact that trial even happened was purely coincidental. When he stumbled upon the evidence of the Einstadt's group in mass murders, and sat at a calculator and started calculating the number of dead that the Nazis had documented, because they were great at documenting all of this. He went to Telford Taylor and he said, I have evidence here of mass murder, over 1 million people by these that were killed by these killing squads. This is in addition to the extermination camps. And he says, we got to do something. And basically Telford Taylor says, we're out of money, we're out of this, we're out of that, I don't have anybody to do it. And he looked at Ben, he said, you want to do it? And after those few words and Benny saying, yeah, I'll do it, that set him on a course for the rest of his life. The fact that Taylor asked him to do it because there was nobody else, and Benny, at 27 years old, with no experience whatsoever in a courtroom, never prosecuted a case in his life, was suddenly thrust into an international spotlight, which what has been called the biggest murder trial in history. By the way, I first discovered that trial of his role in that, rummaging through my grandparents' drawers one day, and came upon newspaper clippings that I didn't quite understand. I was quite a youngster. My grandparents were living in the Bronx at the time, and I saw these newspaper clippings with pictures of Benny and headlines, biggest murder trial in history. And from that grew my interest in obviously his life's work. And it was only through sort of happenstance that I even stumbled on that. I do recall also that when we were younger, living in New York, my dad was listening to the radio one night, and Benny was on the radio. It was in the early '60s. I forget what year it was, and he was commenting on the trials taking place in Israel for Eichmann. So Benny was brought in as a consultant. Obviously, he did participate as a prosecutor in that, but he was brought in as a consultant for the trial of Adolf Eichmann after the Israel had brought him to justice. Obviously, probably 60 years ago now, I guess.
So Steve, this is Smile on Seniors. And one of the other things that you and I discussed is, if you ask Benny what he had for dinner last night, he had no clue. Ask him what happened in the courtroom 75 years ago. Absolutely precise. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think that's just the nature of growing older. It's obviously sitting up and taking nourishment is an important part of living, which he does quite regularly. He does have 24-hour care. In fact, he started with 24-hour care when his wife, my Aunt Gertrude, her health started to decline, and she needed that help, and he refused to put her into a facility. So he kept 24-hour a day care for her round the clock. Obviously, he could afford to do that, and she passed away a couple of years ago, and he's kept the same help for himself. But yeah, they prepare his meals, they take care of him. It's incidental to his goal in life. Remembering what he had for dinner is unimportant. Remembering what happened in the courtrooms and what happened at the tribunals and what's going on at the International Criminal Court and what he can still do to save humanity is still his mantra. It still burns, in his gut, and he's not going to give it up. He will, as he says, never give up. And he's got a plaque at the front door of his home in Florida. It's a plaque that says "Law, not war." If I can find it.
Come a little closer. There you go. There you go.
That's what you're greeted by. If you knock on his front door, that's what you see before he answers the door. And he also has it on his license. Well, he gave his car away, finally gave his car away. But he did have bumper stickers with that as well.
Yeah. Steve and Scott, I really want to thank you both. This has been a most informative discussion about an extraordinary man. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation, Izzy. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so you can unmute your mics if anyone wants to schmooze. We're around. This is general schmooze time.
I'll be back.
Okay, bye. Be well.